approaching the end of Sefer Yehoshua. Today we're going to look at Perek Chaf Aleph. Again, just to remind people, the first part of Sefer Yehoshua dealt with the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, and then we spent quite a few prakim on the Chalukah, on the division of the land that was both conquered and the land that was not conquered among the various tribes. A tribe that was larger in population got a bigger chelik of the land, and those were very complicated geographical discussions of the boundaries of the Shvatim. And then after the boundaries were established and the chalakim were allocated, we then read about the 6 arei miklat, 3 in Eretz Yisrael proper and 3 in Eivor Liarden, that were there for the people who murdered or killed someone b'shogeg inadvertently, that they could escape the wrath of the Goel Hadam by seeking refuge in the Ir Miklat. And essentially what you see is Yehoshua is essentially carrying out the agenda that Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu in the Torah. Conquest, division, arei miklat, and now there will be a final stage, and that is arei leviim. Remember this, when Yaakov blessed his sons before he died at the end of Chumash Bereishis Parshas Vayechi, so Yaakov didn't really give such a blessing to Shimon and Levi. He cursed them. He says, Orur apam, their anger is accursed because they killed out Shechem. And he said, Achal kaim bi Yaakov, I will divide them among the tribes of Yaakov. Afitzeim, I will scatter them by Yisrael. And Chazal say that Yaakov Avinu's curse was fulfilled for both Shimon and for Levi. Shimon, as we learned before, Shimon had no separate portion in the land of Israel. Shimon simply had a number of cities within the territory of Yehuda. And Shevet Levi, as well, does not have a chelek v'nachala in Eretz Yisrael, but Shevet Levi has 48 cities that are dispersed throughout all of the Shvatim. So both Shimon and Levi were scattered and divided, just as Yaakov Avinu stated. But Rav Hirsch points out, and this is really Pachat Pshat, that this is for two different reasons. Shimon's anger and propensity to violence were considered dangerous, and as a result, he had to be neutralized by scattering him within a larger tribal unit, such as Yehuda. With Shevet Levi, it's the opposite. Although Shevet Levi also was a kanoi, was a zealot, but they turned their zealousness for the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they became the Kohanim, the Leviim. And as a result, the reason why they're not given a portion of Eretz Yisrael is that they shouldn't be overly involved in Gashmias. They should be involved in Torah and Avodas Hashem. And their beneficial influence should be spread throughout Jewish society. And thus, there are arei leviim in the tribal areas of every single part of Eretz Yisrael. So yes, both Shimon and Levi are divided and dispersed, but it actually is for two different reasons. And the Torah does say that the Leviim essentially had the 6 arei miklat. They were 6 arei Leviim, and they had 42 extra cities, a total of 48 arei Leviim, dispersed through the 12 tribes, and Perek Chaf Aleph will discuss how this chalukah took place. And it starts off saying, Vayikshu Rashei Avos HaLeviim al Elazar HaKohen Yehoshua ben Nun Rashei Avos HaMatos Levnei Yisrael, that the heads of the Leviim came to Elazar, Aaron's son, who was the Kohen Gadol, to Yehoshua, and to the heads of all the other tribes, and they had a complaint. We didn't get our cities yet. Vayidabru aleihem b'Shilo, right? The Mishkan is now in Shiloh, B'Eretz Canaan Lamor. Hashem tziva b'yad Moshe. Hashem commanded through Moshe, Laseis lanu orim lashaves, to give us cities to dwell, umigrishehen, and these are pastures around the cities that are called a migrash, libehemtenu, for our animals. Again, this is beferish in the Torah, that every city must have a migrash around the city. And the pasuk tells us, "Vayitnu b'nei Yisrael aleviyim minach halasam," that all of b'nei Yisrael then proceeded to donate various cities from their inheritances to the Leviim, al pi Hashem, in accordance with Hashem's commandment. As ha'arim ha'ela, they gave cities, v'yes migrishehen, along with the migrash, along with the pasture land around the cities. Vayetze hagoral. All right, so let me explain something. We have, of course, three major families of Shevet Levi, and we know this from the Chumash. Levi had three sons, Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. And they were given different jobs in terms of the Mishkan. Kahas himself had four sons, Amram, Yitzhar, Hebron, and Uziel. Amram was the father of Moshe and Aaron. So all Kohanim who come from Aaron are from Kahas. And then, however, there are Kahasites who are not Kohanim. They are just Leviim. That would be the sons of, Moshe Rabbeinu's own sons, as well as Yitzhar, Hebron, and Uziel. So therefore, essentially, we're going to see that the tribe of Levi is divided into four groups. Kohanim, number one. Number two, the rest of Bnei Kahas. Number three, Bnei Gershon. And number four, Merari. And the pasuk is going to tell us each of those components. First, we're told how many cities in the aggregate they received, and then we will enumerate the specific cities. The first allocation was made to Kahas because they are the holiest of the Leviim, and in Kahas we differentiate Kohanim and the rest of Bnei Kahas. Vayihi lifnei Aaron haKohen min haLeviim. The land that was allocated to the descendants of Aaron, the Kohanim, was in the territory of Yehuda umimate Shimon. Because remember, Yehuda and Shimon share one territory because Shimon has cities within the Nachala of Yehuda. So the Kohanim dwelt in the area of three tribes. In Yehuda's territory, which also included Shimon, and in Mateh Binyamin. Now this is quite logical because this is in proximity to both Shiloh and eventually the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, and they were given 13 cities. Okay, so again, we're going to see later how the cities were divided among the three tribes, but at this point we're simply given an aggregate number that Kohanim got 13 cities that were dispersed in the territory of Yehuda along with Shimon, and in the territory of Binyamin, 13 cities. V'lifnei kahas hanosarim mishpachos mateh Ephraim u'mateh Dan u'michatzi mateh Menashe b'goral orim eser. And to the rest of Bnei Kahas, they're going north. Mateh Ephraim, the Chatzi Shevet Menashe, that is west of the Yarden, and Mateh Dan, which is west instead of north, you'll remember, along the Mediterranean coast, and that was an additional 10 cities that were shared with Ephraim, Dan, and Chatzi Mateh Menashe. In other words, going north of the Kohanim and going west of the Kohanim. Again, it's a little bit of a kasha, given the fact that Kahas had four sons, and Amram is only one of those four sons. One would have assumed that the Leviim from Kahas would have been more numerous than the Kohanim, and yet the Kohanim get 13 cities, and the rest of Kahas only gets 10 cities. There has to be an assumption that there were simply more Kohanim than there were Leviim of Bnei Kahas, that Kohanim were blessed with fertility, and therefore they needed more cities. So, B'sach HaKol, Kahas gets 13 cities for Kohanim, 10 cities for the rest. What about Bnei Gershon? So on that we say that was shared by Mateh Yisachar, Mateh Asher, Mateh Naphtali, and the Chatzi Mateh Menashe, that is on the east bank of the Yarden in Bashan, in the Golan Heights. That's the area that was once the kingdom of Og Melech HaBashan, and that too was 13 cities. Livnei Merari lemishbachosam is Ruvain, that's Ever Liyardain, Mate Gad, Ever Liyardain, and then Zavulun, that is back in Eretz Yisrael proper, and that is 12 cities. The Malbim explains that the determination of which tribes would get which Levium was determined by a Gairel. That Aaron HaKohen stood there with the not Aaron, Elazar HaKohen stood there with the Urim B'Tumim, and when Yehoshua would pick up a petek that would say Gershon, then the appropriate tribes would light up on the stones of the Choshen. So that is how it was determined which Levium would go to which tribes. Now, B'sach HaKol, you actually have, once again, you have 48 cities here. You have 23 that go to Kahas, 13 for Kohanim and 10 for the rest of the Levium. So that's 23. And then you have 13 that go LeGershon. So that's going to be 36. And then you have 12 for Merari, and that is how you get the number 48, 48 cities of Levium. So after we've given this general description, we now go into the specific cities. Vayitnu mimateh b'nei Yehuda, mimateh b'nei Shimon, Esa Orim ha'ela asher yikra esen b'shem. So of the 13 cities of Kohanim that are divided between Yehuda, Shimon, and Binyamin, we're first going to cover the Yehuda and Shimon because they're in the same area. And it mentions, Vayi livnei Aaron mishpachos hakahasim ibnei Levi, ki lahem hayagarol rishona. They were given the first allotment. Vayitnu lahem es Kiryas Arba. Kiryas Arba, which is Chevron. Again, it is called Kiryas Arba, both because Arba is the Anak, the giants who founded that city, and also because we have the 4 Zugos in Maras HaMachpelah, Adam and Chava, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. And Chevron is in fact an Ir Miklat. It was in the Chelek of Yehuda, and that was one of the cities of the Levium. And even though we said before that Kalev was given Chevron, but that refers to the fields and the courtyards and the suburbs of Chevron, as the next pasuk makes beferish, as Sedei Ho'ir, the fields around the city, other than the Migrash, of course, v'yes Chatzeira, and the courtyards outside of the city, Nosnu leKalev ben Yefuneh bi'achuzaso. So that's one city. V'livnei Aaron HaKohen Nosnu es Ir Miklat Herotzeach es Chevron Uzashah. So Chevron, the Ir Miklat, was given to the Kohanim. Livna es Migrashah, Siater es Migrashah, es Eshtomaya es Migrashah. These are the names of the cities. Es Cholon v'es Migrashah, v'es Devir v'es Migrashah, v'es Ayin v'es Migrashah, v'es Yuta v'es Migrashah, es Beit Shemesh, and this might be the modern Beit Shemesh, v'es Migrashah, Orim Teisha me'ez Shnei Ashvatim ha'ela. So of the 13 cities given to Kohanim, 9 of them were in the territories of Yehuda and Shimon. Now the Malbim points out, of these 9 cities, 8 of them were Yehuda's cities, and only 1 of them were Shimon's cities, because Shimon had much less territory than Yehuda, so Shimon only gave up 1 city, Yehuda gave up 8 cities, and that's 9. Now, we have 4 left for the Kohanim, and those 4 are in the Chelek of Binyamin. Umimateh Binyamin, es Givon, v'es Migrashaha, es Geva, v'es Migrashaha, es Anasos, v'es Migrashaha. Anasos might be familiar to you. Anasos is in fact the city of Yirmiyahu HaKohen, the Nabi Yirmiyahu from Anasos in the land of Binyamin. That is the first pasuk in the Sefer Yirmiyahu, and that fits exactly this idea that Anasos was a city of Kohanim. V'es Almon v'es Mikdasheha, Orim Arba. So 9 of the 13 are Yehuda Binyamin, 4 of the 13, Yehuda and Shimon rather, 4 of the 13 are Binyamin, and therefore Kol Orei B'nei Aaron Kohanim Shalosh Esrei Orim Umigrashehem. The Kohanim were given 13 cities along with the Migrash, along with the pasture land around the cities. Now we have 10 cities for the rest of Bnei Kahas. Mishbechos Bnei Kahas, Halavim Anosarim Bnei Kahas, Vayi Arei Gogalam, as we said before. This was Ephraim and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, that's west, and Dan. So now we talk about Ephraim. Vayitnu lahem es ir miklat erotzech es Shechem. Shechem is one of the Arei Miklats, and that is in the Chelek of Ephraim, and that was given to the Leviim. Es Migdashah Bahar Ephraim. Then we have Gezer Ves Migrashaha, Ves Kivtzayim Ves Migrashaha, Ves Beis Choron Ves Migrashaha, Orim Arba. So of the 10 cities that will go to the rest of Bnei Kahas, Ephraim gave 4. Mateh Dan on the Mediterranean coast, the southern Mediterranean coast. El Taka Migrashaha, Gibson Ves Migrashaha, Ayalon Ves Migrashaha, Esgas Rimon Ves Mikdashah Orim Arba. Okay, so Ephraim gave 4, and Dan gave 4, and we're going to see that Mimachzes Mate Menashe gave Tanach Ves Mikdashah, Esgas Rimon Ves Mikdashah Orim Shtayim. So once again, you get your 10 cities, 4 from Ephraim, 4 from Dan, and 2 from the Chatzi Shevet Menashe. And that completes Bnei Kahas, because you have your 13 for Kohanim, and you have your 10 for the rest of Bnei Kahas. Kol Orim Eser Umigrasheim Lemishpachos Bnei Kahas Hanosarim. This went to the Bnei Kahas that were left over. Now we go to Gershon, and Gershon will also get 13 cities. V'ufnei Gershon mishpachos haLeviim mechatzi Mateh Menashe. So they get from the half of Menashe. So actually Menashe does give 4, but 2 from the west, and then they give to Bnei Kahas, and then 2 cities from the east that they give to Bnei Gershon. V'ufnei Gershon mishpachos haLeviim mechatzi Mateh Menashe es ir miklat. Again, this is the ir miklat es Golan b'Bashan. Ves Migdashah, Ves Bashtara, Ves Migdashah, Arim Shtayim. Matei Yisachar will give 4. Kishyon, Ves Migdashah, Davras, Ves Migdashah, Es Yarmus, Ves Migdashah, Es Ein Ganim, Ves Migdashah, Arim Arba. Umimatei Asher, Mishal, Ves Migdashah, Es Avdon, Ves Migdashah, Es Chelkas, Ves Migdashah, Es Racha, Ves Migdashah, Arim Arba. Okay, so it's 2, 4, 4. 1 second here. I'm trying to keep count. For Bnei Gershon, we had 2 from Menashe. We have 4 from Yisachar. We have 4 from Asher, so that's 10. And we need 3 more. So Naphtali will give us the 3. Mematen Naphtali, Esir Miklat, Harotzeach. Naphtali had an Ir Miklat, Kedesh, in the Galil, V'es Migrashaha, V'es Chamas, Dor, V'es Migrashaha, V'es Kartan, V'es Migrashaha, Orim Sholosh. Naphtali is the only tribe that only gave 3 cities. Every other one gave 4, and Yehuda wound up giving 8 out of the 9. And Kol Arei HaGershuni L'Mishpachosam, Shalosh Esrei Ir Umigreshehem. So again, 13 to the Kohanim, 10 to the rest of Bnei Kahas, 13 to the Bnei Gershon. Now we have 12 cities that go to Bnei Merari. And we say, Mishpachos Bnei Merari Le'Levim L'Nasarim, Mi'es Mateh Zevulun. So we have Zevulun, Yoknaam Migrashah, Karta Ves Migrashah, Dimna Ves Migrashah, Es Nahalol Ves Migrashah, Orim Arba from Zevulun, from Mateh Gad, Ever Yardain, the Ir Miklat, Harotzeach, Ramot Begilad, Ves Migrashah, Machanayim Ves Migrashah, Es Cheshbon Ves Migrashah, Es Yazer Ves Migrashah, Kol Orim Arba. Right, so we have 4 from Zevulun, we have 4 from Gad, and now it's interesting that we need 4 cities from Ruvain. And in the book of Yehoshua, those 4 cities from Reuven are not mentioned, so you only have a total of 8. In Divrei Hayamim, which is a parallel account, it then mentions the 4 cities of Reuven that are mashlim, the minyan of 12, and the Minchas Shai brings that some Svarim, some Masoretic texts of Yehoshua actually have those verses. So the Reuven cities are missing, but there are 4 of them that go to Merari for a total of 12, and therefore Kol Ha'arim Uvnei Merari, L'mishpachas Haman Osarim, L'mishpachas Halevim, V'Garolam, Shteim Esrei. So we have a total of 48 cities of the Levium, including the 6 Arei Miklat. Kol Arei HaLeviim B'soch Achuzas B'nei Yisrael, Arim Arboim U'Shmona U'Migrashehem, Tiyena Ha'arim Ha'ela, Ir Migrashasi V'Osel, Kain L'chol Ha'arim Ha'ela. And this is a permanent halacha that these cities can never be taken away from the Levium, and you can't even expand them. It's interestingly enough, the Gemara says in Erchin that you cannot convert, you can't expand the city into the Migrash. You actually need the Migrash to remain there. One could argue that that's an environmental concern. We want there to be parkland and pasture and prevent urban sprawl. That's what Rav Hirsch suggests. Vayitein Hashem liYisrael el kol ha'aretz asher nishba l'seis li'avosam. And eventually, now this doesn't mean now, because when Yehoshua died even, there were large parts of Eretz Yisrael that remained to be conquered. So this pasuk is not referring to the reality at the time of Yehoshua, but it's kind of a nevuah as to what will happen. Hashem will give, but it's as if Hashem gave already, all of the land that he promised to their forefathers, the Avos, v'yirashu, and they will inherit it, v'yeshvuva. Vayanach Hashem lahem misaviv kachol asher nishba l'avosam, and God will give them menucha from all of the enemies that surround him. V'loi amad ish bifneim, and no one will be able to oppose them. Again, this didn't happen yet, but it will happen. Mikol oyeveim, eis kol oyeveim nasan Hashem biyodam. God gave all of their enemies into their hands. And it says, and it ends with a lot of fislavos. Loi nafal dovor mikol ha-dovor hatayv asher diber Hashem el Beis Yisrael. Not a single thing of good that Hashem said about Bnei Yisrael will fall down. Hakol ba, everything took place. Again, some of it not yet, but if HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised, it's gonna happen. So this was the final administrative allocation that Yehoshua did. Chalukas ha'aretz l'shvatim, designation of the Arei Miklat, and designation of the 48 Arei Leviim, which include the 6 Arei Miklat.